Make sure I'm on the good Wi-Fi. Okay. Apologies in advance. My dogs love to bark when I'm on Zoom, so they might make an appearance and I might have to throw them outside. But thank you guys for having me. My name is Lacey Henderson. I have been working alongside the SDSU Adaptive Athletics program this will be my second year. And my roles with them has changed a little bit. And that's because my business has also changed a little bit. So I guess a brief overview of me would be, so I'm a Paralympian. I am a long jumper for US Paralympics. I went to the Rio 2016 games and have been doing a handful of world champs teams, a handful of Pan Am teams, albeit this pair of Pan Ams. That was kind of a surprise to me, which is exciting. As I'm winding down in my career, and I started working with a sports psychologist when I was with a pro group in Phoenix getting ready for Rio. And I really benefited greatly from that. And it had always stayed with me as something beneficial in my life that I wanted to incorporate. So in the spirit of being candid, after the post-COVID year, Tokyo trials, I did great at trials. Para selection is always a little different. So they told me that I ended up being number 27 on a roster of only 26 females. And it was like emotionally distressing. And I was like, this is a good time to go back to school. So I ended up going back to get my master's in sport and performance psychology. I went to UST in Houston. They had a hybrid program. So I was able to do that and train at the same time. And from there, the program itself had created kind of like a system where if you get enough hours, you can go directly into having your CMPC. There they go. So your CMPC is a certified mental performance consultant, and that essentially is a non-clinical sports psychology credential. So basically what that means, if I were to be clinical, go ahead and go outside, guys. This is around dinner time, so it gets a little crazy here. If I was clinical, a clinical psychologist basically needs like anywhere from like 1,500 to 4,000 clinical hours. It requires a little bit more school. The licensure looks different. And then like the nitty gritty of being clinical would be like, I would be diagnosing people and I would be doing clinical care. And I just don't want that responsibility right now in my life. So the CMPC was perfect. And what that basically means is we are sports psychology consultants. So a lot of our work, it has to do in the mental performance space. And then like a little bit of just kind of like life stress management, things like that. So it looks a lot like counseling, especially our one-on-one sessions, but it's not therapy. It's not clinical therapy, if that makes sense. And I had initially started with SDSU. I know Akil really well, who started the program, Akil Whitehead. And I needed to get my hours in. So they were really great about me coming in and getting my hours in and working with athletes. We did an athlete retreat. And then this year I am now advising the University of Denver grad students to be doing their mental performance hours. In order to get that CMPC credential, you have to get 400 hours and then you take an exam and then you get the credential. So I am kind of like overseeing that. And then we will still do an in-person retreat around January 20th. So if you're around, you should come through. It's going to be great. Last year was a great success. So this year we're planning bigger and better things. That'll be a lot of fun. And right now in my private practice is actually called Parallel Performance Consulting LLC. So that is actually from the prefix from Paralympics. A lot of people don't know that the prefix para in Paralympics is actually meant to be parallel to the Olympics. So that was something important for me, I think, as far as my brand and just moving the sports psych practice along. I had like great success with my sports psychologist. So he was clinical, but I have yet to find other disabled athletes in the space. So it was important for me to show up and like make that a part of who I was and like what I wanted to who I wanted to work with and like what I wanted to kind of be even spaces in research and work along that. I have a pretty decent like private client load right now. I also am a high performance mind coach with a group called Finding Mastery after getting that CMPC. So it's basically delivering mental skills and sports psych practices into the corporate executive space. So that's how I pay my bills, but then I get to have fun with athletes on the side. So getting ready, moving forward, I have some non-disabled athletes I will be helping with at Pan American Championships. Next week we leave, and then I'll have a quick turnaround and come back and compete. Not planned, but having a good time. And it's a cool industry. There's a lot of ambiguity, but coming from the athlete experience, I think, especially in track and field, you have to create so much of your own structure that it actually just kind of translated really nicely for me, like as a career. So I don't know what the future necessarily holds completely as far as like what it's going to look like, but it is bright. And I think there's so much space for research to be done, especially in the para spaces, the work that I've seen so far, and like some of the I guess notices that like our overarching organization is called ASP. So that's the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. That's who you take your test under. Yeah, some of their stuff on parasport should be updated, in my personal and professional opinion, coming from parasport. And it just seems like having the disabled sport context, like within the overarching theme of sports psychology and mental skills, there's a lot to work with, and there's a lot that I think is being overseen, and there's a lot that we can do to implement work with our para athletes and disabled athletes to not only achieve high performance, but just like achieve like a nice quality of life. So it's been a fun journey. I hope that was a good overview. I am happy to answer any questions. I didn't really prepare anything super formal, but I would love to have this be kind of conversational and answer any questions and kind of give any context that you guys might want to have.
That's all super cool. I had never, previous to this, I had never thought of how I'd never really thought of sports psychology specifically. And then to layer on top of it, the whole like I guess, increased awareness that needs to be put on specifically to Paralympic athletes. So I think that's really cool. I do have a question. So a lot of us in here are going to probably some form of grad school because a lot of us are under kinesiology. What was your experience like with that hybrid grad school?
You know, I thought it was going to suck, and it did not suck. It was a mix of like asynchronous and synchronous classes. Our program was relatively small, so like the professor was really good about kind of making the schedule work around a lot of people's schedules, because with our program, we had the age range would have been anywhere from like 22 years old to like, we had people in their 50s. So like we had working professionals, we had parents, and then we also had like people fresh undergrad. But it was a pretty good system. Like, I mean, I was on Zoom. I did Zoom school because I live in Denver. And so I was primarily here. I traveled a lot for track, and I was able to still do class as well. You know, I think post-COVID, we all learned really how to be adaptable, ironically, in those spaces. And like, if I was going to be gone to like record class, I think the asynchronous modules for like some of the core competencies of psychology, those classes were like very efficient. They were not easy, but they were efficient to do. But the experience was good. I think like I didn't experience undergrad during a global pandemic, so I don't know like necessarily the transition of what that's like as far as an undergraduate experience. But I know just like from where I was at in my life, like as a working professional and still training full time, that the hybrid model really actually like was beneficial. And then I got to graduate, which was cool, which I went to in person. That one I did not do hybrid. I can take comments. I can take questions.
Also, I can ask what more questions.
Of course.
Okay. So, you kind of touched on it, but I'm still a little confused. How does sports psychology and performance counseling, like, how do they kind of intersect and how are they different?
Yeah. So sports psychology as a discipline has a lot to do with like what they call it is mental skills. So it's like visualization, emotion regulation, time and stress management, I say time management mostly for like my undergraduate population, my student athletes, stress management, which is also kind of under that umbrella. A lot of them can be translated to life skills. There is like kind of a nebulousness of it, but like the like hard line is that we're non-clinical. So like we can't in the US, like you can't call us psychologists because that like only goes through APA, which is the American Psychological Association. And that comes with the clinical credentialing. So that comes with like those extra. CMPC is 400 hours and like a PsyD or a PhD clinical would be like 4,000 hours. And so the education is a little bit more in depth on the clinical side. That's like a little bit more of like the abnormal psychology, some of the dysfunctional stuff. And it just kind of like the way from where I operate. So we still like work on a lot of the psychological frameworks, but a lot of what sport psych work and mental skills is like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness acceptance therapy, and like a lot of positive psychology. So it's less like investigating problems and trying to fix the problems. It's more being like, okay, what's the tools that you're working with? What are like some of your character strengths and like how can we improve from there? So I hope that kind of explains it a little bit. I know it's like, unless like you're in the world of psychology, like the only limiting thing too is like if you're clinical, there's also you run into limitations as far as like state licensure. So if you're licensed in the state of California or you're licensed in the state of Colorado, where you practice, so if you're traveling with a team, can get like a little bit hairy as far as like the CMPC though, like that doesn't require that same state clinical licensure. So you're able to travel and have a little bit less hoops and door and whatever like obstacles to go through as far as that practice. But like what it really comes down to is like we don't diagnose anybody, and then we wouldn't do any sort of clinical care. So there's like additional clinical competencies in psychology, like some trauma work. EMDR is what I'm thinking of right now. Like there's certain things that are like very clinical specific that like I wouldn't be qualified to do because I can't get that training because I don't have the clinical licensure. I feel like I gave you a lot of words, so let me know if anything needs clarification.
That makes sense. Thank you.
No worries.
I had a quick question. I hope you can hear me. It's kind of loud where I am.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, that's good. But I remember you mentioning that you got like 27th out of 26 women's on like a team maybe.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering like what would your advice be like going through something that's discouraging and emotionally like setback?
Yeah. Oh, sports. Yeah. So I mean, like the cool and funny thing about sports is like you will always experience disappointment, and sometimes it's profound disappointment. And I do like a lot of my sports psych work. I also try to consider like a lot of the systems. So like dealing with like the NGBs and like the overarching organizations, and like for example, like that would be whatever athlete is going on at SDSU adapted athletics. The adapted athletics would be like the overarching organization, because the systems I think can affect how people set goals and how people experience their value when it comes to certain circumstances, which may be like you just don't have a good competition or you don't make a team. And like a lot of those things are completely out of the athlete's control. Like, and it's hard because like the narrative for so long, especially in just like the sport world and the Western world, is like work hard, it's going to pay off. And like that's not, there's so many moving things that happen in these systems and organizations that's not necessarily always the case. So having a good practice in coping is really important, I think, for any athlete, but especially for para athletes, because the Paralympic movement itself is like still evolving. And so right now we're kind of caught in this limbo of like, it's becoming this elite sport movement, but it's also becoming like a social movement for inclusion of disabled people. So it's like a weird tug of war, and some people, some different, I'm trying to like not just keep saying people, but some different individuals who have varying disabilities are going to be affected differently than people with other disabilities. So it's not like we're moving towards equality or equity, but it's not quite there yet. And it's just like a reality of sport. I'm not sure or really like satisfied with thinking that sport is inherently fair, but like we volunteer to be in these competitive environments, and like the outcome is the outcome. And sometimes an athlete cannot control that. And so really having a good contingency plan that you've already built up, not just like with resilience, like being able to kind of like ride the outcome, but also building up, like, how do you value yourself? What are the internal things that I do in order to make myself feel worthy? How am I also contributing to other aspects of my life outside of sport? Because again, this like sport world is kind of evolving so much. The demand is starting to get really, really high. So it's easy for an athlete to kind of be like, I'm just an athlete, I'm just moving towards this. But athlete identity, again, like will always be sacrificed from the nature of how sport works. So making sure that you're having a good balance and you're tending to all of the gardens in your life, because that is also like a way that you're able to kind of work through coping mechanisms of dealing with disappointment, and things like that. And I think like, I mean, it's, it's a cold world out there, but it's something that sport is something that is, in my belief, is a human right, and everybody should have access to it and everybody should enjoy it. And there are lessons to be learned even in failure and loss. But really building up that, like the emotional resilience and good coping mechanisms, which is really interesting in the disabled sport population, I've noticed, because like disabled athletes, I feel like we're like the extra super duper master manipulators, because being disabled in a mainstream world, you just have to you have to reintegrate. Like this world is not created for people with disabilities. So we're constantly adapting, we're constantly evolving. And for a lot of people, that's a really strong skill, and it's really nimble and flexible, and they can apply it to a lot of different aspects. But then for other people, only applies to one aspect. It only applies to the disability, or only applies to their accident. And so like that's where some of my work comes in, where it's like, how do we identify this strength, and how do we kind of like work on flexing that muscle so that it can start integrating into different aspects of life, including sports, so that when you don't make a team, or you have a bad competition, because these are just realities of sport, that you're able to bounce back quicker and like focus on the task at hand and keep progressing in your sport career. So I'm really giving you guys lots of words for these questions, but I hope that it's covering everything.
No, yes, that was like beautifully said, and I'm writing so many notes. And thank you. That was nice. Yeah, I'll look back on it.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Then kind of related to that, when did you realize that like you could become a Paralympic athlete, and that was like a path or something you could, I don't know, make a part of your life?
Yeah. My story of like coming into Paralympic sport was, I think it's different than how it is now. So I graduated undergrad at the University of Denver in 2011. So I'm a woman of a certain age, but I grew up doing competitive cheerleading. I'm a right above the knee amputee. So I had my leg amputated right before I turned 10 from cancer. And I come from a sport family. Ironically, I come from a track and field family. So my dad was a 2-time national decathlete champion. He went to Olympic trials for he was like in these Hall of Fames he's a really good coach as well. So he's coached some college teams. He's been recruited for some Olympic teams for coaching. And that was just my backyard. So like I had the privilege of coming from a sport family that had access to a lot of like just knowledge, and even like pole vault pits and like all the track equipment and stuff. And I had a really prosthetist at the time in Denver, like who always supported me in whatever crazy thing I wanted to do. Initially, it was competitive cheerleading. So I cheered in high school. I got a scholarship for it at the University of Denver. So those were like floor tumbling skills, all those. I grew up like in mainstream sports. So me in my young 20s was also like, I was the kind of like college student where like you couldn't tell me nothing. Like the confidence was at an all-time high. The delusion was maybe also at a very all-time high as well. But at that point in my life, like those were character strengths, or those were skills that I had that served me at that time as my Paralympic track and field career expanded and progressed. Like the confidence, the faking until you make it, like no longer served me, because I had to actually like do stuff. So my dad was initially my coach. I kind of fell into the world of parasport randomly as I was graduating undergrad. I started at 21, which would have been nicer if I started a little bit earlier, to be honest, but that's just how it was. Like, we didn't really see a lot of disabled athletes in mainstream media, like, YouTube, but we had the slow internet, like things were just very different. And I had actually entered into the track and field world by doing pole vault. So again, only my family would have access to like a pole vault pit and poles just for me to try. And then I really enjoyed it. I was like, I was graduating from undergrad, and they don't like, professional cheerleading is not really like a real career path for anybody. But at that time, I hate to brag, but it was the first worst recession of all time. So like, nobody was getting real jobs at that point, straight out of undergrad. And I had started volunteering consequently all around the same time at the Amputee Coalition's youth camp. So that was where I was introduced to seeing like normal people, whatever that means, with running prosthetics. Like, I had always seen, when I'd go to my prosthetic office, like people in the magazines with the running blades, and I'm like, oh, they must know that they're runners, and I don't know I'm a runner. But that was how I knew like I could maybe get a running leg. And so my prosthetist made me a running leg. I wanted to do it for pole vaulting, and I kept Googling amputee pole vault. It didn't come up with anything, because pole vault's not an event for para, but I kept getting rerouted to Paralympics, and like, I didn't know what that was. My parents are in their 70s, so like, they come from a certain mindset, a generational mindset of like, no special stuff, like very much like kind of like the ableist beliefs that we see still perpetuated, but like strong, very strong in them. And I didn't know, like, I didn't know. And I know a lot of people like can't differentiate the difference between special and Paralympics. So like, I had also thought that those were maybe similar, and I didn't know that there was something specifically for physically disabled people. But also, because we come from a track family, especially in the state of Colorado, there's a guy, Tom Southall, used to be a coach for Paralympics for a long time. He's a congenital arm amputee, and he had been wanting me to just jump in a couple 100 meters. So while I was competing in pole vault just for fun at track meets, I jumped into a 100-meter race in 2011, and qualified for London. And so again, like, with who I was at that time, I was like, I guess I'm good. I guess I'm going to come in. I'm a D1 athlete. I'm going to show all these like disabled people what's possible, which was great, because then I went to nationals and I got smoked. Like, I went into that race and like, I got my ass beat down. Like, I did not do good. And it was a good sobering moment. My personality is like very competitive. And so I was like, this is not how this for me, but it was a good wake-up call, I think, for me to realize that like, this is not Yo Mama's Paralympic sport anymore. Like, this is just, these are elite athletes. These people take it seriously, and in order for me to be successful, I'm going to have to formalize my training and be serious about my training, how I approach this. So that was a little bit of my entry into sport. I had avoided long jump for a really long time, because coming from a cheerleading background, I didn't want to get dirty and like, you have to jump into sand pits. I know it's so embarrassing, but that's who I was. And so it took me a couple of years, I think, based on my limb length as an above the knee amputee. Like, I'm not going to generate the force that I need off the ground to be really successful globally in sprinting. So I started translated really well. And that year I broke a 17-year-long American record. I'm the current American record holder. And it's been a good ride, I think, since then, since kind of like resigning that I'm gonna have to get dirty, rinse off, and be able to again like translate my strengths instead of constantly trying to like conquer my weaknesses. That's really like what was most beneficial for me for my career. So that is my story of how I became into Paralympic sport.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no worries. Oh,
Do you have any more American records?
I did. I think
pretty
was
cool.
a question, but I have the world record in the pole vault, but that's not, since it's not an official event, like, it's not very easy to have a world record when not that many people are doing it. But just for long jump, yeah, it's just long jump for me. But I know I saw that Adrian had their hand up.
I just had a question. What made you decide to be sports performance, psychologist or practitioner, sorry.
Oh, you're good. I know they're like, they get very weird if you say psychologist. Yeah, I usually say psychology practitioner or like a consultant. What made me want to do it? I mean, I think one, like my work with my sports psychologist like was really beneficial, and I did do clinical work with him. I did a little bit of EMDR, which is my eye movement directive like desensitization. That's what that means. That's what that acronym is. So that was like trauma work, like with in regards to a lot of like my childhood cancer experience, and also just being a human person in the world. Like we don't really make it this far without a little bit of damage. So that ended up being really beneficial to help me kind of clear my head and handle business. So that was really beneficial, just having somebody that I think like was a good sounding board. I didn't come from a family culturally that was like super into therapy. Like that was never like again, my parents were a certain age. My family's very Italian. So like kind of this Latin background of being like, if you're not strong enough mentally by yourself, then you're just not ever going to be strong enough mentally. If you need help, that's weak. So it took me a really long time. But it was such a benefit, like, and it translated past sport. And that's like really my passion now as a practitioner, is like being able to help people on the court, but also like enriching people's lives outside of it as well, because there are a lot of translatable skills when we are performing that can help us in our everyday life, and vice versa. Like what's happening behind the doors of the field of play can affect our performance. So it's being able to show up your most comfortable self in all of these different arenas and be able to execute what you need to execute. And so, I mean, it was good work. And again, like coming from the Paralympic background as a Paralympian now, like the work in general is good and important, but I do think that there are some like very specific considerations regarding the para athlete that can enhance it, that I think is currently being missed right now. And so like that's what I'm here for. Like I want to show up for that, and I want the sport and the social movement to grow and be better than it was than when I entered, and I would love to be a part of making it better.
Wow, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Is there maybe a favorite memory you have from your time traveling and well, you're still traveling and competing, so.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was unexpected. You know, when I was considering retiring, I don't even know why I'm telling you guys this. This is not even answering your question, but I will get to answering it. I was talking to one of my training partners. I was in a professional group in Phoenix when I was seeing my sports psychologist, and it was a mix of Paralympic and Olympic athletes. And initially, actually, my training partners in Colorado got invited, and they're non-disabled people. And I was like, do you guys, I talked to the organizers of that group, and I'm like, would you be interested in starting a Paralympic program? And they were like, nope. And I was like, and again, because of who I was like, do you mean yes? So we ended up having like, at one point there was like 6 Paralympic level athletes from different countries, and Olympic athletes training all together. We had an amazing experience with that training group for the years leading up to Rio. And when I was considering retiring, I was talking to one of my best friends, who's my training partner. He's a long jumper, non-disabled, out of Australia. And I was like, what do you miss most about it? And he's like, I don't know, the trips were fun. And honestly, the trips were a lot of fun. I think there's been track meets where like the trip was more fun than the competition for sure. And I think that's also like the aspect of my work where like being human alongside being an athlete is so important, because there's been a lot of athletes I've come across where like the competition was everything. They never allowed themselves to enjoy the trips. They never allowed themselves to enjoy the rides. And I think for me, Rio was amazing. I had a Brazilian in my long jump final, so like the crowd was insane. And the most like thing that is honestly closest to my heart was that my dad went to Rio. My family was there, and like that was really special to me. And then like going into Tokyo trials, where like I had my best year that year, and even right now, like I had different coaching over the years. And then the past couple of years I've been spending it with my dad. So it's been kind of a cool way to really like to spend with him. Like I can tell he really loves coaching, and he likes coaching me. And the long jump is just like, it feels so vulnerable to do it. When you do it right, you feel very vulnerable, or at least I do, because like you can't look at the board. So like you jump from a board, and if you go over the board, it's a scratch. They won't even measure it. So like the relationship and communication with your coach as a jumper is like they have to be your eyes. And to me, being able to share that with my dad has just been like, that's really been probably the most special thing looking back on all of it.
That's very cool.
I know, it's very cute. I wish I had a cool, like more legendary story, but yeah, honestly, looking back, like it's the relationships that I've made and like how I've seen, at least like from my experience, like how I've seen people as humans, like that has really been what's probably touched me the most in sport. Although if you do need a long jump coach, I know a lot about the long jump now as well.
I think if anyone has any more questions, if not, we can let you go.
Yeah, no worries. Well, and you have my contact info because I know sometimes I know I gave a lot of information, and sometimes it takes some oh, my hand is like following me on my Zoom. It can take some time to process. So if like there's any follow-up questions that happen after this call, like feel free to give out my contact info and I can answer anything. Yeah.
I think Julie just typed in the chat if you could talk a little bit about your work with SDSU Adapted Athletics.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't see it on the chat. I'm like, for some reason it's still not showing up. So I love the SDSU guys. Like it's such a broad, it speaks so much to just like the Paralympic movement, I think, as a whole, and like the demographics that it incorporates, because like we have such a wide age range, right? Like I was just talking to one of the DU athletes about like dealing with some of the more like adult community athletes, and you know, I had to explain, I'm like, Paralympic sport in and of itself is so unique because a lot of people don't acquire their disability until later in life. And then furthermore, like a lot of people don't find Paralympic sport until even later after their injury. So I think that like the ecosystem of that is changing, just given like the way that the internet works now. But the SDSU guys it's so fun. It honestly feels like kind of working a little bit with a startup, because it's like it's a new program. It's not only is it a new program, but it's like a new idea incorporating like this type of sport in the collegiate sport environment. So it's been fun kind of like watching everybody find their identity within like a larger sports system, like in the, you know, in like the collegiate sports system, but also to see how the culture is building and evolving, because it has to incorporate a lot of different people, a lot of different things. And I don't think, like, especially in the disabled sport context, that there's not really a one size fits all that's going to be like, you know, universal design for every disability. That's just not how it works. So I think it's been cool kind of like seeing where they're finding the identity in including everybody, and also creating space to expand. And yeah, I've been working with like some of the leadership guys for a few years now, and know some of the athletes that are like returning athletes for a few years now. And it's been interesting now kind of transitioning some of the one-on-one work to the graduate students over at DU, but also like now we're going to reorganize and implement another in-person athlete retreat in January. And those days are just so fun. I think I'm really intentional about including disability in the conversation and in some of the mental skills that we implement, because it's just a part of, you know, if disability is weird because it's not who you are, but it's a part of every part of you at the same time, depending on the severity, whatever. But no, it's just been such a blast. It's been really cool to see like how much this has grown. And like I think it truly is going to be one of the programs that's going to be a pillar in the disabled sport movement, and also the disabled sport development system, because right now the US, like, we've been really lucky for Olympic sports to have NCAA as a development program, but para doesn't have that. And like, unless you are a disabled athlete who can score points in NCAA systems, like how you develop as an athlete is going to be missed. So it like now is the right time. Like it's really the right time for a program like this. And it's just like, it's really cool, not just to see it, but to be able to be a part of it. And like, I'm humbled by that as well. So I mean, they're great. They're the best. I mean, I'm like, I feel like an honorary Aztec. Go Aztecs.
I think that's it. Anyone have any more questions? Thank you so much for joining our meeting and sharing with us. It was really cool to hear both your Paralympic experience and your professional, well, both are very professional experiences, but very cool to hear from you and your experiences. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you guys asking me to be here, and I am happy to, again, if there's any other questions that come up later, you know how to reach me. So I'm happy to address anything, and I'm glad to be a part of the team. All right. I guess that's it for me. Have a good night, everybody.
You too. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Okay. Julie, would you like to share about the upcoming volunteer opportunity?
Absolutely. Excellent. First of all, thank you, Kalina, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for having me at the meeting. It was great to get to hear Lacey talk. And it's nice to get to just see those who are on the meeting. I see there's a couple of people who stayed on afterwards and some people who might watch it on the rewatch. So I am with the athletic program as the new external program assistant that just joined the team in September. So I wanted to get a chance to meet you guys and kind of learn a little bit more about how your general board meetings work. We have a lot of appreciation for ASDEC Adaptive Sports and what you guys provide for sort of the partner organization for our athletes and our events and our programs. We have our next event coming up, which is going to be a really awesome opportunity for you guys to just come and be a part of. And I wanted to ask people to save the date. We'll be sending out some information very shortly. And we also want to collaborate with your marketing people to be able to get the message out to your community. But November 7th, which day of the week, I have to pull up what day of the week that is, we're going to be having the adaptive athlete presentation. And this is a really special event because we're going to be having two keynote speakers. For those of you guys who haven't heard so far, it's going to be Lex Gillette, who is a 5-time Paralympian world champion. He's a visually impaired runner and long jumper, so also long jumper. And he also is going to be speaking with his 4-time Paralympian running guide, Jerome Avery. So they are coming to speak, and that will actually be following our SDSU athletes who are going to be speaking, each telling their story and tying it into our motto of CREED, which stands for commitment, respect, excellence, empowerment, and diversity. And so the whole event is scheduled to be between, we're going to open the doors at Student Union in Montezuma Hall at 10 a.m. And then we're going to kick it off at about 10:20. And from there, we're going to have about 5 athletes speak between that time, and then a Q&A panel at the end. So that'll go to about 12 o'clock, just before. Very brief intermission, and then we're going to have the keynote speakers from 12, followed with a keynote Q&A, and then wrap it all up at 1. So we're going to need people who would like to come and volunteer for a number of things, because we're going to be inviting a lot of people in the community who are visually impaired. So we'll need people who can be ushers, both helping people from, find the student union and from the parking lot area. We're going to be having need for ushers and people at the check-in booth, people at the promo booth. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, but it's going to just be a really cool event to be at in general. We want to invite people. We have a lot of space for people to attend, so we want to get the word out about that. And then, of course, everybody in the organization is welcome to come and just listen. The cool thing about this is, for those of you who are at the Lift-a-thon, just so there's not any confusion. You don't have to be there the whole time as a attendee or even as a volunteer necessarily. We may have some shifts that we need everybody that whole time, but we are gonna make it so that people can come and leave, so we know that people have classes and other things they need to do. So don't let the 10 to 1 a time kind of scare you off. There will be opportunities where there'll just be natural transitions where people can come and go. Let me see if there's anything else about that event I want to be sure to share. First of all, does anybody have any questions? No questions? Okay. We're going to be sending out we're going to have a flyer, save the date on Google Calendar, as well as social media. So we'll just want to connect with you, Kalina, to see who's the person that would be the best person to get that info to.
Sounds good. And then for everyone, Adrian, who's here, and everyone who's like watching this later, we will put out a volunteer sign-up sheet and be announcing it in the group. So yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Kalina. I'll speak with you offline. Have a great day.